Anyway, yeah, we were talking about climate change, and I was curious, ever since I saw your presentation, and it was a while ago, Colin, and it was in the early days of the autonomy class for me, but I was still new to the idea that this was a group of people that were really, I guess, like-minded, in their kind of openness and questioning and stuff. So anyways, I was really surprised. It's like, oh my God, there's someone else. So
Yeah, there's a few of us actually haven't been lobotomized, and we actually still check things out and actually question things, not get all our knowledge from the experts. And do you know the definition of an expert?
I know.
It's a drip under pressure.
A drip under pressure, really?
Yes. It used to be a spurt of water. It's now a drip.
Well, what's funny is that, obviously this is something you've looked into way more than I have. What happened with me was I became aware in a roundabout way that I'd been lied to about most things. And I started questioning everything, right? And then for me, in terms of climate change, I came across the Maunder minimum, right? And just the idea that it's not controversial, that it's well accepted, that the sun's output varies over time and it's not constant, like I think is assumed, that I thought, oh, wait a minute, this probably plays a role in climate, right? But it's not mentioned.
Yeah, like the sun, which shines on the earth, 24 hours or 12 hours a day, is probably more important than a trace gas. It's 0.04% of the atmosphere.
Right, yeah.
It's probably more, yeah.
No, yeah, absolutely. No, sorry. So I was just going to ask you. So what I've been curious about, and I've been trying to circle around with you for months, because I want to talk to this guy. How did you become aware of this issue originally?
Well, yeah, I was. What was I? I was a school teacher originally, but I left teaching in 1986 and worked in IT and ran my own businesses and so forth. So I became aware of conspiracies, I suppose, in my 30s, so probably about 30 years ago. And until then, I just accepted everything, and what was. I had my training in physics, and I was a conventional physics-trained IT person. So I was pretty good at the logic and so forth. And I did like to understand meanings and whys. And I just started questioning things. And I'm an environmentalist, I would say. I care about the environment and I care about pollution, like I think most of us do, and want to leave the world a better place than we found it. And so I accepted all the science stuff initially in the noughties. So it's from 2000 to probably about 2010. I thought, oh, well, it kind of makes sense. But without much care factor. I'm here in Australia, and we're used to hot weather and we have cold winters, so that was pretty normal. I didn't notice anything being much different. I thought it was hotter when I was a kid in the 60s. But I then started questioning a bit. But then in 2009, I went back teaching again after a 23-year break from teaching, and was given science lessons to teach in science textbooks, and the climate change was written into the textbook, and carbon being a pollution, and straight away, come on, this doesn't make any sense. And I was teaching propaganda, so I just used it as I wasn't a normal teacher. I was an emergency teacher, so I was in and out of lots of schools, lots of classes, which is a great gig because there's no responsibility. So I was given lessons to teach, and because I was a relief teacher, the kids wanted to have a holiday, which is what they expected. So I used the opportunity to teach critical thinking. And about that time, I'd come across the Tragedy and Hope people and the Trivium Education website and so forth. And I was looking for that material, so I found that and went through that and discovered the trivium, and that's what I learnt in physics. So that's how you learn to do physics problems. You check out your facts, you check out your grammar to start with. I didn't call it the grammar until I did the trivium, but you check out what the facts were, and then you'd verify the facts were whether they were accurate or not. And in science, you then design an experiment to disprove your hypothesis. You don't design an experiment to try and prove your hypothesis, which is what the climate change people were doing.
Right.
Yeah. I was well aware of the term confirmation bias. And I found out a new term recently that I quite like, which is, what is it? It's noble cause, the Dirty Harry philosophy. Noble cause, what is it? Google it.
And
it's basically when you believe passionately in a cause which is noble, and lying and cheating to get the cause is justified.
Yeah. And sadly, I think that's become part of the kind of postmodernist agenda, right? With a lot of the social justice warriors justifying violence.
Noble cause corruption. Noble cause corruption. Have you heard of that?
No, but I understand the idea, and I've noticed, a trend. I think, or what I think is a trend in that.
Well, see, noble cause corruption. It came from analysing the Dirty Harry books, where Dirty Harry, Clint Eastwood, the old police movies, where he sort of bent the rules a bit. To basically, he knew they were crooks, he knew they were crims. It was okay to execute a few of them.
Right.
They were guilty anyway, not go through due process.
Right.
And so noble cause corruption is a real problem in the police forces of the world, and it's well documented. It's also been quite a big thing in the Catholic Church with paedophilia, whereas the church is more important than the little children.
Yeah.
And of course, it's the same thing they're using for climate change. So you've got the climate extremists that say it's happy to go and destroy people's businesses and livelihoods because of the climate crisis. So the potential ends justifies the means. Right. And when you're arguing with people who come out straight away and start to abuse you as a climate denier, they're suffering from noble cause corruption. Because they believe in their heart their cause is noble, and the facts don't matter.
Yeah.
And so that's what they're actually suffering from.
And right. Well, and it's scary, right? I mean, I saw a noble lie, right? Or an inconvenient truth, sorry. Yeah. And at the time I guess I hadn't done any grammar, as you mentioned, right? And I thought, my God, this shit is scary. This is terrifying. The world's about to end, He's got a graph. It's a PowerPoint. And he made a pretty convincing argument, right? But again, it was not, I didn't know much. So I think a lot of people, and it's funny how the manipulation works, right? Because when you come out and you hit that cognitive dissonance where they know you're wrong, but they haven't looked into it, and maybe they can't counter your arguments because they haven't looked into it at all. They just react emotionally. And the way they've painted it in the United States is, if you're a climate change denier, or whatever the prerogative, whatever label they put on you,
that's using language.
Yeah, you're a right wing, conservative, probably racist Republican, right? That's who wants to kill Bambi, right? Because you've got, and they leave it at that. And anyway, so you had a background, you understood. This jumped out at you as nonsense. This idea that carbon dioxide as a pollutant. Because of course, it's almost everything we do produces carbon dioxide, right? So, including breathing.
I was aware about greenhouses. I was interested in growing and plants. And my background is, my family ran orchards, so we grew fruit trees. And I was aware of that carbon dioxide was a scarce thing in the planet, and that plants had their structure, had their somatils, their pores where they breathe through, were designed to maximise the absorption of carbon dioxide so the plants could grow. And that the plants are actually gasping for carbon dioxide. They're starving because the atmosphere is so low on carbon dioxide is just enough to sustain plant life. If you want plants to grow well, you put them in a greenhouse and you pump carbon dioxide in and they'll grow brilliantly. And if you pump carbon dioxide in, they don't need as much water, so they become drought resistant. So if the atmosphere had 2, 3, 4, 5, up to 10 times the amount of carbon dioxide in it, as it does now, the planet would be fantastic.
Yeah.
And I also understood from physics, I looked at the global warming, the gas of carbon dioxide, and it's not a linear relationship. Carbon dioxide is a warming gas. It does make the atmosphere warm. And if you put in 20% more carbon dioxide, that'll have a warming effect. But if you double it or triple it, it only has a small effect. It's a logarithmic relationship. So you can, once you've doubled the carbon dioxide from what it is now, that will give you some warming. But when you double it again, it'll have no effect because it has a limit to what it can do.
From my understanding, too, the whole idea of greenhouse gases having a greenhouse effect was based on a lot of assumptions made as to how Venus got to be super hot, right? They noticed a really high temperature and a thick, atmosphere, and therefore the two are correlated. And as far as I understand it, it's also there was a misunderstanding of even how greenhouses work themselves. So it was just like flawed assumption upon flawed assumption, but it was convenient, right? Because if you can control carbon dioxide, you control all human activity. So I guess somebody saw, this is a really convenient lever, right? We can push and pull on this and control everything.
When I was first teaching, one of my subjects was agriculture. We had a greenhouse. I knew how a greenhouse worked. And a greenhouse levels out the temperature. It makes it warmer and keeps it warmer. It stops it from getting colder as well. And that's the effect clouds have. So clouds stop you getting too warm, but also stop you getting too cold at night. So a desert has extremes in temperature where it gets very hot in the open sun and dry open sun in the day, and it gets very cold at night. Whereas the tropics stay roughly at 30 degrees. Now, they might be, on a really hot day, they might get up to 33 degrees. On a really cold night, they might get down to 27. But roughly, the whole tropic band stays at 30 degrees. So even global warming is warmer at the poles, the same in the middle. The middle just gets wider. And the tropics are places where plants and animals survive and live fantastic, easy, food available, never too cold, never too hot. So the tropics are where life likes to be.
Right.
So all global warming is going to do is make the best zones in the world bigger and the worst zones in the world more habitable.
Right.
So global warming is a good thing. And you add 8 degrees to the planet and life overall will be better off. There'll be some losers, like the deserts will move further south, but the top of the deserts will become green and fertile again.
Yeah.
And the desert will be smaller and thinner.
And it might even buffer what we seem to actually be going through, which is kind of a global cooling, right? Due to the planet, or the sun, solar activity diminishing. And
oh yeah, that's what the signs are addressing at the moment. It looks like we're heading into another ice age.
Right.
And when we drop into an ice age, we're going pretty quick. It happens over a decade, not over 100 years. So in a decade's time, we can be in serious trouble. And but they can still call it climate change and blame carbon dioxide for it because they don't have to have any evidence.
Well, yeah, no. Look, well, before we get into trying to wake people up, I don't know what the situation is in Australia, but here, with the geoengineering and the constant, spraying that they're doing, of for whatever reason, it's been now justified as deliberate cooling of the planet to try to head off this disastrous global warming, right? And you're right, they're calling it global change, climate change now, but the underlying mechanism they claim is still the same, human activity, greenhouse, runaway. I mean, maybe with local cooling, because they have to explain why we haven't had a summer in California 2 years in a row, as far as I can tell. I mean, it's people are wearing jackets and it's June. And
about they've homogenized all the land-based records? Do you know about the homogenization of the data?
I know that they've adjusted it, or NASA does some adjustment of it, and they justify it in some way. But anyway, it seems like if you don't adjust it, all the global warming trends go away, and they only manifest after adjustment. And what I'm familiar. Well, like again, you've obviously looked into this way more than I have. But have you heard of a group called Suspicious Observers? They're based in the U.S. and basically it's like a weather nerd channel. So that's where I first came across some of these ideas and started learning about some of these things. But one of the things that they've done is they've looked at the Wayback Machine, and how it records the internet. And it's pretty interesting. You can look at NASA data before and after, massage. So they had actually pulled these things out of the Wayback Machine. Here's the actual raw data presented by NASA, and then a few days later, before an announcement, after they adjusted it with with these trends. So some subterfuge.
Taken out. There was a heat spike in the 1930s and 1940s. So the last 100 years, the temperature was hot around the turn of the 1900s. So 1890 to 1900, it was warmer. Then cooled down again by about 1910. Then had a warming spike around the end of the 1930s, around 1930, 1940. But then cooled again till about the 60s. And then from the 60s or the 70s onwards, it started to go up again. And it peaked around 2000. And since 2000, it's basically levelled off. So it hasn't been a constant increase from 1900, but carbon dioxide has. So CO2 has been going up at a constant rate for about 200 years. And so that doesn't indicate that it's the driver of the temperature changing. Temperature's doing this and carbon dioxide's doing this. So Al Gore's graphs are all dodgy. The old hockey stick graph is totally wrong, totally fake. And, Michael Mann's a criminal, but he's still running around like Al Gore was over here in Queensland 2 weeks ago with Hillary.
Sorry to hear. Oh my gosh.
Get paid by the government $350,000 to give a presentation to the Queensland government. But that was all arranged when they thought that the Liberals were going to lose the election. So that was just after the election. And they've now had to approve what's called the Adani coal mine. So they'd all set up to have Al Gore out there, and they were going to stop Australia producing coal. And coal is responsible for about a third of Australia's income. So if we stop, it's our biggest exporter, even more than iron ore. So if we stop our coal mines, which they are threatening to do, Australia would become a third world country.
Yeah, so many things to say there. So I tell people, well, not that I have a lot of people that I can discuss this, right, this sort of thing, but I see that that's what's happening to the United States. It's like it's getting the third world treatment now. And I kind of see this collapse happening, economic and self-imposed, and not to go too much on a tangent, but I'm from Mexico, right? And there's this Argentine comic that every Latin American knows. He's incredibly famous. The guy's brilliant. He's hilarious. His name is Kino. He was making comics in the 70s. I taught myself to read from Kino comics anyway. But I remember there's a strip. It follows like a middle-class family in Argentina. And the little girl, she looks at her TV and it says made in the US. And she looks at her radio and it says made in the USA. She looks at her watch, it's made in the USA. And then the punchline is she looks at her belly button and she goes, at least that's different, right? So in the 1970s, all the manufacturing was basically decimated in Latin America and all moved to the US, right? All of a sudden, things that were manufactured, like Mexico even made cars at some point, but then that was all, free trade agreements and whatever, and all that moved out. But what's interesting now, it's like there's nothing left that's made in the US, right? There was this manufacturing powerhouse. Now everything's made in China. It's like you could reprint that 1970s Latin American comic book from the late 60s, early 70s, and now you could set it in the US, where like nothing's made, everything's made in China, and that was a big industrial base. So anyway, obviously I see it as a big problem, and that's amazing. So I didn't know that was happening in Australia, because if that's a third of your economy, that's a bullet dodged, right, for sure.
Well, at the moment, but it's only 3 years away from the next election, and they keep coming back. And
that's incredible. Getting back to this thing about the climate, one of the points that is made by suspicious observers is climate change can be observed, and they do a good job of documenting this on all the other planets around in the solar system, right? Where you can hardly blame, human, human activity. So, the great storms in Jupiter, all these things that have been observed for hundreds of years are changing for the first time ever. And it seems to be directly related to changes that are happening with the sun. And
not the first time ever. They've always changed.
sure. Well, at least in terms of, they're storms that have lasted hundreds of years, say.
Yeah, our telescopes are good enough now that we can actually watch what's happening.
Sure. Yeah, but no, there's certain features that we've observed for, in some cases, hundreds of years or wherever since the beginning. When the great spot or whatever.
Yeah, that's what Jupiter. That's a storm that's been raging forever.
Yeah. So yeah. So there's like these changes for the first time being observed, and in all the planets. So there seems to be something going on with the solar system itself, and the driver of climate in the solar system is probably the sun, right? I mean, and the point is that these changes are happening where you can't blame human activity. So there's something else afoot. It's kind of the point.
Yeah. The arguments are also phrased in the alarmists' language, so that makes it difficult. So even the fact that we're discussing climate change, when their argument is man-made global warming. Yeah. So they've changed the words, and it's not even climate change anymore. It's now extreme weather or climate catastrophe.
Yeah.
So that's the new language.
It's funny how well coordinated they are. I noticed it for the first time about a week ago. We got a notice from our electric utility saying that we need to brace ourselves for power outages lasting up to 48 hours due to extreme weather. I think that was the phrase. It's like, oh, look at that. And somebody else pointed it in some other government, extreme weather, it's the new phrase.
Where do you live?
I'm in California.
All right. So you've got a big dependency on renewables. Is that right? Wind farms and solar power and stuff?
Up here in Northern California, there's a lot of wind farms. I'll be honest with you. I don't know what percentage of our power we actually get from them, but there's quite a few. And, but I couldn't tell you. I mean, we have a lot of nuclear power and, I just don't know the breakdown.
Yeah. Anyway, the problem will be the mix. And in Victoria and South Australia, where I'm based at the moment, they've closed down a lot of their coal-fired power plants. We're not allowed to have nuclear in Australia because back in 93, the Labor government at the time passed legislation to make it illegal to operate a nuclear power plant for electricity in Australia.
Mm.
Here we are, a country with 42% of the world's uranium supplies, exporting uranium or yellow cake, unrefined uranium, and we're not allowed to build a nuclear reactor.
Yeah.
But hopefully that'll change soon. But we have plenty of coal, so we have really cheap brown coal right next to the capital cities. So brown coal is lignite. It's no good for export, but it's brilliant for producing electricity. So they basically set up a coal plant, dig a hole next to it, conveyor belt the coal in, and they've got 1,000 years worth of free fossil fuel to run these plants. But they've closed them all down. So one state, South Australia, is closed down all their plants and they put in lots of solar and wind. So in the evening when the sun's set, or if it's cloudy and the wind drops, they don't have enough power and they have blackouts. They've got some gas-fired power plants as backup. And Elon Musk came down and built the world's biggest battery. So they've got a massive big battery attached to one of the solar plants, and it can power the place for 15 minutes when the power goes out. I'm not sure how many hundreds of millions of dollars that cost. And they've now bought massive banks of diesel generators for backup.
And then the other thing that upsets me, I mean, we're pretty close to where Tesla Motors has a plant, so you see a lot of Tesla cars and stuff, but the production of all these batteries and electronics is horrible. It's so dirty, and the idea that we're doing this to save the environment it's crazy, but it's being outsourced, right? And I guess it's almost all being done in China, so we don't really see it here, but
they've done the maths on them, and if you compare a Tesla, just to say the base model Tesla, to the base model European, like diesel Golf or something like that. You have them over there, don't you? Do you have the VW Golf?
I've got a TDI, but yeah.
Oh, so you know exactly diesel? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, if you take over the lifespan of the Tesla and your car, and taking the carbon produced to manufacture it, and the fact that Tesla's going to last, I think, 10 to 12 years for the battery, needs to be replaced. So over the expected life of the vehicle, your car produces less carbon than the Tesla.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me, And
Plus it's a third the price. Plus it's in the range of 800 miles instead of 300 miles. And it takes 8 hours to recharge it unless you've got a special high-powered charger. But if you've got the fast chargers, right, that'll charge them in about half an hour, they decrease the life of the battery by about 50%. When you do a fast charge, and that's assuming you're driving the car in a climate that never needs a heater. If you're driving the car in a climate in winter and it gets cold and you have to heat the inside of the vehicle, that takes as much power, electricity as it does to move it.
No,
they don't even bring those things up. Oh no, we've done our figures under ideal conditions. We don't need to heat or cool the car. And with the internal combustion engine, you've got surplus heat, so heating costs nothing.
Right.
To run the air conditioner off an internal combustion engine is insignificant as well.
Yeah. No, and it's annoying. I mean, we have friends that are doing their bit to save the environment by buying a Tesla. Like, oh man. And of course, we get a lot of grief for driving a diesel because, there was the whole scandal with VW, right? And they were kind of cheating. And, and I keep telling my wife, like a lot of these limits are arbitrary. I mean, this thing, okay, it's polluting like it was 1999, but it's still, I don't know, comparatively speaking, it's a different scale from gas and diesel, right? They work a little differently. And anyway, so we're not meeting some arbitrary set for pollution, but I don't know. I think our car is much greener than a Tesla,
Yeah, and also you need to define the word pollution.
Right.
Do you think, do you include carbon dioxide in pollution? Really?
Right.
Carbon dioxide is not pollution.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
no. Yeah. No, it's frustrating.
Diesel have more particulates. They produce more smog. But if you've got the right catalytic converter and exhaust system, you clean most of that out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I know they can be configured to run very cleanly. So, and they often are. And anyway, when I was younger, I interned at Chevron, which is kind of like the big Northern California oil company, right? Yeah. Or they're not based in California anymore. They moved. But anyway, I remember going to a presentation as an intern, and they were operating a fleet of diesel cars in LA. So, and it was whatever. It was a test fleet. Granted, it was experimental, whatever. But they were measuring the pollution levels in the intake and the exhaust because they wanted to exactly measure, how dirty or how clean they could get these engines to run. And anyway, in LA was so polluted that supposedly in some cases the exhaust was cleaner than the intake, because these things were running so clean and the air was so dirty in LA already, but yeah, there were. So they can be made to be run very cleanly. So in terms of engaging people, so one of the questions that I've had ever since I started, realizing that the world doesn't work the way we think it does is how to engage people. In the Socratic method, man, it's I found it hard to do, right? To just ask questions. Maybe I lack the patience and I tend to just jump in, but so this I'll joke, like I mentioned, it's been uncommonly, strangely cold in California the last 2 years. I mean, this morning, I still saw people wearing scarves and jackets. It's like June in California, right? And I'll just, I'll make passing comments. When somebody will complain about the cold, I'll say something like, "Hey, I was promised global warming. We need more of that global warming action." And oftentimes people will think I'm just being especially goofy, and they'll smile and just keep walking. So I piss them off maybe sometimes, but it comes off as like maybe a stupid joke that fell flat. So they let it be, they don't attack.
No, it was a great way of approaching it because if it wasn't so tragic and so expensive, it is actually quite funny. And I think it's quite legitimate to point out people's contradictions. You just listen, and it's good to listen to people. And I genuinely like listening to people and hearing what they say. Because I'm sure a lot of people, when they speak, they're not listening to themselves. They wouldn't say such silly things. just say, is this what you meant when you said this? And then did you just say that? Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think, to me, they're the opposite. It's a contradiction. Be confused and be genuinely interested in what they're saying. And half the time I'll get upset because they didn't actually want to be questioned. They just wanted you to listen and not respond.
Yeah.
They're on their soapbox. They've learned something and they've come out of the school system where they've been educated to regurgitate and parrot stuff back. And that's all they want to do because that's how it works.
And it's funny how often, and I guess maybe this is part of the trick, they're just repeating what they heard.
Yeah.
And they make it sound like they've said something profound,
Yeah.
But it's like you're just repeating the same thing everybody else is saying.
Like, I trust NASA. Now, NASA are on reproach. NASA are from the government. You've got to trust them. They wouldn't lie to you.
Well, I was deep in that trap myself. They're scientists, they're smart. Hell, they put a man on the moon, right? So they must know something.
Sure.
That's and that's what I used to think.
I'm pretty sure, but I'm not 100% sure.
Well,
I'm sure that the world's not flat.
Well, I'll tell you, the one thing that made me laugh was when they recently came out and said that I don't know if they sent the probe or they did more calculations, and it turns out the Van Allen radiation, this is recent, a couple of years ago, that the Van Allen radiation belts are much bigger than they first realized. I'm thinking, didn't you just fly through them in the 60s? I mean, how are you surprised by the size of the Van Allen radiation belts now? Maybe they grew. I don't know.
Yes. Well, definitely with the moon landing, there were fake photos out there they produced. So a lot of their artwork and their propaganda and PR around that was produced in the studio. That's a given. So they had a backup plan. So if they got to the moon or not's in question, but I'm certain if they did crash, didn't make it, we'd still be having the same footage and the same story now. So whether they made it or not, they were definitely going to say they made it. Either way, they had a backup plan.
Well, and I'll tell you something else. I think it's much cheaper to fake it than to actually do it. There was a war going on, and there were a lot of financial needs by a lot of important people around that time. So I don't even know what the original plan was anyway. So I don't know that there was ever an intention to go actually go. I don't know that there was a technical ability to do it. There's all these questions. There's a guy named Dave McGowan, another American, and he wrote a series called Wagging the Moon Doggy. And for me, that was the final nail. I was already questioning things. For me, this was a sacred cow. I had wanted to work for NASA as a kid. I became an engineer because I wanted to work on rockets and stuff. This is my dream, right? Yeah. But what he does in Wagging the Moon Doggy is he presents the official story as told by NASA, but he puts it in chronological order and gives you some context, and you realize how improbable the whole thing is. In fact, how downright laughable some aspects of it are. It's like, oh my gosh, not this too. That's where I'm at. But it's a fun read. He's a funny guy, and it's actually a fast read. It's called Wagging the Moon Doggy. You can find it online. And I don't know, for me it was all these other video analysis and photo analysis and all this other stuff. It's like, I don't know. Okay, I was at the point where okay, I think we're being lied to. But
I love the people when they're trying to run down a conspiracy theory that you might want to discuss. They say, well, their argument is, well, they couldn't cover it up because thousands of people would have known. There would be whistleblowers. They'd be saying what happened. And I said, well, in every case there are, hundreds of people saying exactly that. Oh, but they're conspiracy nuts. You can't count them. So your argument is there'd be people speaking up. Oh, but there'd be credible people speaking up. And as soon as someone credible speaks up, are they credible? No, they're not credible once they speak up. So I say, let me just go through your logic again. You're saying they couldn't hide from hundreds of people would speak up. And you're now saying that anybody who speaks up is a conspiracy, tinfoil hat loony, so they don't count.
Right.
So
Yeah.
you want someone who counts, but the fact by speaking up means they don't count. Is this your logic? And that's their logic.
No, and it's even funny to get into like the details, right? When you start looking at how big organization like that works, people's roles are so compartmentalized that very few people actually have like a wide view and stuff. So for instance, with NASA, right? You look at how they were training. So like they would do a test run, and if you're an engineer in charge of whatever, monitoring telemetry on temperature of the engines, right? So your whole job during the whole mission is you're just looking at a screen and looking at data from a monitor. And what the control guy says is like, okay, this is a simulation to test our computer systems. Okay, and you go and it's a simulated launch and landing and whatever. And then now they tell you this is the real deal. And it looks the same to you. The only difference is you were told that this was a simulation. And then now here's this theater. We have a countdown. This is the real deal, boys. And what's your computer read? It's like, oh, pretty much what I read before. It's like all systems go,
So you're a witness.
Yeah, you witness and you believe it, and you go to your grave, getting into fistfights because some kook questions this, right? But you realize, so I think I don't even know how many people necessarily need to know for something like this to be carried out. Or I noticed it even in my own organizations. I used to work at the Port of Oakland briefly. I have a friend that still works there. And when I first started questioning, bringing up questions about authority and government, whatever, his response was like, you worked at the Port of Oakland, that's government. They're not evil, and like he had proven his point. It's like, we were engineers, so we worked on the second floor of the Port of Oakland, right? We didn't know what was happening in the third or fourth floor. They were making business decisions that would baffle us, right? Why are they selling that? How come they're doing this? That makes no financial sense. But we're just engineers. What the hell do we know? We're in the second floor. But he, all of that was kind of lost on him. It's like, yeah, you work there, but it doesn't mean that you know what's going on at the port. It doesn't mean that you know what's happening at the city, and sure as heck doesn't mean that you know what's happening at the federal level. So that's so that's anyway. So have you been able to, in your mind, successfully get somebody to question their I don't know, the climate narrative?
Yeah, I've not people who are fanatics though. I've woken up quite a few people who are ambivalent.
Okay.
Yeah. So people who just didn't really think about it. They accepted the government view, but they weren't. Yeah, I don't think I've actually converted any passionate greenie lefty type person, because once they get to that stage, they're usually beyond reason. All I've done is upset them immensely. If I've bothered to put the effort in. But I usually don't bother with the effort. If I've identified a person who's beyond reason, I don't waste my time. But sometimes I'll take on a debate, particularly a Facebook debate, just to hone my skills, because they've come up with an argument that I haven't heard before. I thought, oh yeah, I better check that one out. So I like to just look stuff up and work stuff out. I don't mind getting out a pen and a paper and doing the maths, make a claim. Or what are actually the numbers? Is this possible? And you can always do it. Is that possible test without actually being there and doing an experiment? It's very easy, if you know enough background in science to work out what's a claim that's not right. The lies aren't difficult to spot. The truth's a bit of an elusive animal, of course. The truth's always difficult to get exactly right. Yeah.
But just if you're just asking questions, you're so far along than most people, right? And the way I describe it to friends or anybody who listens, which isn't many, it's like the big change for me was I wasn't aware that I needed to have my guard up and question the information as it was coming in. I just passively accepted information from authorities, the scientist or the dude with the white lab coat, right? And you were talking about like passionate lefties. I mean, I more or less grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. I mean, that was me. And
Yeah.
I somehow, in spite of all that, eventually, came to realize that I'd been tricked.
Yeah.
It was humbling. I'd been
Anyway,
duped.
so we've got a new term for them now. They're suffering from noble cause corruption.
Right. Yeah. Well, and it's funny.
And even that's something you can actually even ask them about. First of all, make sure they understand what the terminology means. And then say, well, do you think that might apply to you? Are you okay to blindly use confirmation bias and accept any argument that supports your argument without questioning it or checking it? So if
Mm,
someone says we're going to be destroyed by ocean levels rising, you would just accept that, and you haven't actually looked at the data and the evidence. Are the ocean levels actually rising? And in some areas they say a millimetre a year. Now, a millimetre a year is not going to cause a problem. Over 1,000 years, it's going to be a metre. That's not much.
right.
Now, the tides are a metre.
Yeah. Yeah. So I work with a lot of civil engineers, and I always see that it's, state regulation in California. You got to design for sea level rise. So it's added to the calculation. Your calculations get rejected. You got to add that extra 6 inches or whatever, It's always something insignificant for the life. And yeah, so it's in there, and people just, they don't question it. And I think especially it's a problem with engineers. I throw myself in that group. It's just you go through this process where there's some really smart people that have figured out a lot of neat stuff, right? In my mind, I used to think like, well, planes fly, right? So, science is real, so therefore global warming.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, the oceans are rising, and the Saudis know all about that because they've just started building a $10 billion resort in the Maldives at sea level. $10 billion investment in the Maldives at sea level. Isn't the Maldives are going under?
You think they know something we don't?
Yeah. Where to buy cheap real estate.
Yeah, that's right. Oh my gosh. No, that's great, man. That's awesome. Um, yeah, no, I was asking you about, if you've converted anybody. I think so far it's only been one person, and it wasn't even about climate change. It was, I like to play tennis. We're out on the tennis courts, and they started spraying the chemtrails. And I was like, hey, look, see, that thing looks pretty fluffy and looks kind of natural. That doesn't look like anything that's produced by nature. It's like, oh, I think that's a contrail. It's like, well, contrails dissipate. And the one advantage is that we're out there like 4 hours. So we got to see this airplane, and then another airplane. And where there was once blue sky, all of a sudden it's like, you could see the progression. It spread. So I kept pointing up every 30 minutes or something. Oh, look, it's changed. It hasn't gone away. It's dissipated and spread. And then by the end, we met at 8, by 11:30 noon, and no more blue sky. It's just like this white haze everywhere, And it's like, yeah, And so he saw the progression. It was funny. The next time I saw him, he actually said, like, yeah, I've been noticing what you pointed out, and yeah, I don't doubt it. I don't know what they're doing, but that's, it's the only time I've ever had anybody, maybe listen or,
Yeah,
notice.
there's a few pictures circulating around of dirty great big jets with the whole fuselage full of tanks.
Mm. Yeah. And when I first came across that contrail versus chemtrail, maybe it was early on, I myself wasn't sure what to think, it's like, I know contrails are real,
Yeah, we don't see them much in Australia because we're not big enough to make it worth the effort.
Hmm.
And 25 million people in a continent bigger than the States.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got more people in LA than you have in Australia.
I didn't realize that. Okay. Yeah.
Well, California is what, 60, 70 million people?
I think we're more like 30 or between 30 and 40, I believe.
Population California? No, it's more than that.
Yeah, let's see what it says. I'll know in Google.
Yeah, Google, but nobody trusts Google.
Or Wikipedia. It's usually pretty good for basic facts like those.
Yeah. California. I think it's done for anything. Oh, 40 million.
Yeah. Yeah. It's probably grown a little since last I looked it up. So
Median household income, $71,000. That's not bad. Huge. But still, it's 40 million. It's basically almost double Australia, one state.
yeah. And I mean, it is one of the bigger states.
The biggest state population-wise?
It might be. I don't know how many people there are in Texas. Let's see, population. Yeah, population is about 28 million in Texas.
That's more than Australia too. New York? What state is New York in?
No, New York's probably not that big. I would say 15 million. That's my guess. I haven't looked at it. Okay, so I'm looking. Oh, no, it's bigger. Okay.
What at the state? What state is New York in? Is it in the state New York?
Yes. Yeah. So it's New York City in the state of New York. So the state of New York is 20 million. Florida, I just pulled up this ranking. So it's California at 40 million, Texas at 28 million, then Florida at 21 million, and state of New York at 19 million. Pennsylvania at 12, Illinois at 12, etc. And I'll be honest with you too, I don't really understand the rationale for the spraying. I don't know if they're poisoning us with heavy metals. I don't.
Or aluminium.
Yeah.
Aluminium is not really a heavy metal, but it's. But America's already been poisoned with lead, hasn't it? Haven't you got lead everywhere?
Yeah.
Lead type.
Yeah. And it's. Think yeah, and you know what? And I haven't looked into it. So, but I think aluminum and barium, some of the other things that in chemtrails. So in aluminum, it's not a heavy metal, huh?
No.
Okay.
Probably has the same consequence. It's not a good thing.
Yeah.
That's in the vaccines they inject into you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that is someplace where we're probably leading the world is vaccination. Yeah, no, it's I know it's pretty horrific. I mean, it's the last thing you know. Well, I don't know if it's worse to breathe these nano aluminum particles or be injected with it, but they're probably both pretty bad. So I don't know if it's and it's funny. Just today, Colin, this morning when I was walking, not this morning, but at lunch when I went for a walk at lunch, they're spraying, and I'm thinking like these guys are smart. It probably serves dual purpose, right? Whatever eugenics plans that they have going on in terms of population controls, it's probably not good to be breathing it in. And it may also be accelerating this global cooling, if that's what they want to do, which would also fit into it, right? I don't know at which point crops start failing. I don't know at which point, I know they're already having a hard time in the Midwest and the U.S. with, excessive rain and a shortened growing season. So yeah, I don't know, but I'm sure they've thought it out and planned things out, to 10 decimal places.
Yeah, well, putting aerosols in the atmosphere is supposed to increase the rainfall. It's cloud seeding. That's one of the effects of that. So that should increase the rainfall.
Interesting. Okay. So I know, and I know they've been seeing that, and I just saw an article actually. I haven't followed it that closely, but I was a little bit alarmed when they were talking about not being able to produce food. Oh.
Yeah, well, we'll be okay if it keeps warming.
Yeah.
It starts cooling, we're in trouble.
Right. Well, yeah, and I don't know. Have you noticed any changes in the climate in Australia? Like I said, as far as
the snow season's getting better. It's definitely colder. The summers are not as hot. But that's not what the data's showing from the Bureau of Meteorology, but they're fudging their data. So, Dr. Roy Spencer's got a good temperature graph he produces from the satellite data. Do you know about him?
Mm.
Dr. Roy Spencer. Just Google Dr. Roy Spencer and have a look at the latest. He's got a 40-year graph that he updates every month, and he's an ex-scientist from NASA, and he takes the raw data feed from the satellites, which estimate the ground temperature from satellite pictures, which is the most reliable form of measurement of temperature.
Can you say his name again?
Dr. Roy,
Uh-huh.
R-O-Y, Spencer.
Spencer. Okay. Okay. Sounds good. Yeah, I'll line them up. And and I'll send you a link to the Suspicious Observers. You might enjoy that too. In fact, I'll find that video where they summarize, and it's funny. It's all based on official kind of NASA data and telemetry, but of the change in planetary weather, say, where they're tracking all these different things. You're pretty well versed in all of this, but you still might find it interesting.
Good for grounding, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, this has been a lot of fun, man. This is cool. I want to do this again. I'm starting to fade a little bit. It's getting close to 11, and
yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. Convert the recording to MP4, put it up onto Vimeo or YouTube or somewhere, and let's share it with the boys and see how our conversation goes.